Hi, I'm very glad that we are coming after St. Javelin, because these are different kind of narratives. And speaking about war, St. Javelin is using myths, a kind of stories to speak about war. There are villains and there are heroes, of course, heroes, tractors, heroes, for example. And OSINT is something else entirely. You are dealing with hard facts. So at first I wanted to ask you about, there are different kind of tools which we can use in OSINT. Most of us probably use it, but we don't know it's OSINT. We are speaking about open intelligence, so everything you can find, Google, Yandex, Yahoo, that's an OSINT. We are not talking about buying secret stuff from Darknet or something like that. And we can use it in a different way. And when I was looking what you are doing at your work, you're using different tools. So if you can tell something more about it.
Sure, I'll start. So I think what is important here is that we have to acknowledge that in the era of social media, pretty much everyone is in a form of some degree in journalism already. So everyone's a journalism in a way. So I think the data that people themselves accumulate is very helpful for us who have to use that in our everyday life. So I think when it comes to Ukraine, after February 24th, we saw this boost in disinformation. And not only disinformation, but also misinformation, when people used to disseminate information without checking it, because the chaos of information was somehow very hard to deal with. And also we didn't have time to go through them individually and to find, like, I don't know, original sources or talk to people. So, and when it comes to this information, you have to act very quick, so that you have to kind of come up with a response pretty soon. And OSINT was very, very helpful for us to come up with a solution to that problem in a very timely manner. So we have a number of tools available, which are, by the way, accessible to the public. The ones that we are using in our work in the context of verifying claims is, first of all, satellite imagery, for example. There are tools that we are using for face recognition that is very interesting and very useful when it comes to, I don't know, identifying videos or like victims and stuff. And also the tools that help us to dissect specific videos are also very useful, because I'm pretty sure you all remember there have been a number of videos circulating showing alleged crimes that are perpetrated by Ukrainians, so that the Russian propaganda was portraying it as if Ukrainians themselves were fabricating, for example, the number of victims, or like staging all the atrocities that took place in Ukraine. So what we were able to do through OSINT is that, without contacting to, I don't know, some specific people who would potentially come back to us like a week after or something, we were able to verify those very disseminated videos and then come up with information that we would then give to the public, so that they would see that the narrative was fake and then move on to the next one.
And Oliver?
Yeah, I think in addition to that, the information environment also really changed with the Ukraine war. So what I said was that the information environment really changed with the Ukraine war. Before I worked on Syria, Libya, smaller conflicts or conflicts of the same size who got less attention in the West, and also got less attention on Western social media especially. And back then we had to basically do everything ourselves. So we had to do geolocation, we had to do military analysis and so on. Now, especially if you work for a bigger mainstream media outlet, social media does that for you. There's so many military analysts on Twitter these days who do excellent tweeting, who do excellent analysis. There's a lot of people who do geolocation. For example, there was this retired guy from the US who was geolocating war crimes in Kiev and so on. So we actually don't have to do that anymore. We just have to aggregate it, see what's good, see what's wrong, and then get it out there and verify it, obviously.
And you covered different wars and different stories around the world. What was the the biggest adjustment you have to do according to Ukrainian war?
I would say in comparison to Syria, Libya, especially Arab conflicts, what Ukrainians put out there is maybe a bit less than what Arabs did, because Arabs have a different type of social media culture. They're also maybe a bit more gory, so they would really show you everything, while Ukrainians put not so much out there and not so bloody images.
And how long that it was long, a few years ago, so the reception connection with the internet was different. It wasn't that fast, right?
Yeah, it wasn't that fast, but I think still they uploaded quite a bit. I think maybe also access in Ukraine is better to the internet. I spoke to a lot of our former Syria researchers at Air Wars, and they said, like, actually what gets put out there in Ukraine is pretty little in comparison to Syria.
Okay. And Sandro, for you, as a fact checker, as an analysis?
So the case in Ukraine is obviously very, very unique and different because the scale is, I'm from Georgia, so for us that was something that was very close to our hearts and for not just for us fact checkers, but for the people in general as well. So kind of they were very much engaged in all of this information campaign that was happening around Ukraine. So so that was probably the difference, the scale and the amount of information that was coming. And then obviously from our side, we had to intensify our efforts to somehow deal with that. We had to somehow start working in Russian. We had to kind of expand our abilities. We had to get more training, etc. So yeah, that was pretty much the difference.
When we think about OSINT, we probably think about Bellingcat and what we saw on the documentary about like a very big stuff, Malaysia Airlines, right? A case, for example. A few months ago, they wrote an article in an investigation debunking basically the Russian propaganda about Bucha. And we are facing here mostly, OSINT is fighting with propaganda. Do you have that impression that it's mainly propaganda you're fighting with?
No, I don't think that OSINT is predominantly used for fighting propaganda, but just coming from my own perspective, from my own experience, because what we do as fact checkers, we predominantly focus on misinformation and disinformation, because I think there are a number of other very important people like you all who deal with telling people what happens and reports to the public. So I think given the scale and the amount of disinformation and misinformation that is coming, it's better for us to somehow focus on that specific niche and to that specific direction. But obviously, OSINT is way beyond that and exceeds those boundaries. But again, I think it depends on how you look at it and how you try to utilize it. And in our case, it was to combat disinformation, and it proved to be a very useful way. But I'm sure, and I think Oliver can add to that as well, that OSINT can be used in many more directions than just verification or fact-checking.
Okay, Oliver?
Yeah, absolutely. I think OSINT really helped in improving military strategy reporting, seeing where the front lines are and so on. I think that's really been a game changer there, because, I mean, some OSINT people said it like we're sometimes faster than the CIA or as fast as them, because there's nothing as quick as a Ukrainian or Russian soldier posting video from the front line where they are. Yeah, the CIA also can't be that quick, so yeah. Okay,
so about the ethics of posting and publishing things that you investigated. When we were talking about correspondence, so that is a journalist has got this ethics they build up for like many, many years. And OSINT, we're dealing with OSINT probably for like a few years back. So when it comes to publishing a piece about war, and especially for you, like we are talking about a front line, for example, that can be a data that is very sensible, right? So how can you tell the difference between posting something and not posting, maybe because you can put some people in danger? Is there a dilemma for you? Did you encounter something like that in your work?
At the moment, maybe not so much, because as I said, like I rather aggregate a lot of stuff at the moment, and I think those people who post these videos, images, whatever, I think they already take care of those images being not too recent. So like a lot of OSINT accounts on Twitter say, okay, this video from Kherson is from 2 days ago, so that Ukrainian or Russian position or whatever is probably already gone.
So there was never a case where somebody got sloppy and just posted right away?
Not that I know of, but I think at the beginning of the war, the operational security on both sides of the war still wasn't that great. So I think that especially led to problems on the Russian side, but maybe too few problems on the Ukrainian side as well.
So I think in this case, because we've been also thinking about those ethical aspects of covering the war, and I think in our case, OSINT happened to be the tool for us to somehow stay within that ethical realm. Because, I mean, again, about fact-checking, whenever you're fact-checking a claim made by someone, you obviously have to rely, for instance, on the statement made by the Ukrainian side, but then somebody might think that, you know, that side may also be biased, so what do you do with that? And I think OSINT has proved to be a very useful tool to supplement that and then give people something additionally. For example, in addition to a statement made by someone, you can also show them something very specific and something very tangible through OSINT, be it, for example, geolocation. For example, I think you'll all remember the time, this case might be also familiar for you, that Russian propaganda was claiming that the video published by the National Police of Ukraine proved that the Bucha was staged by Ukrainians because it didn't show the corpses. And obviously the Ukrainian side denied that, but like people need to see something, they need some visual illustration. And what we did is that we used the specific street signs that were noticeable in the video published by the Ukrainian police, and then we tracked the exact same route that they went on, and then we added that part to the article so that we gave them an alternative explanation, something that they could see themselves. So I think in this particular context, it's even more ethical in a way that we give them alternatives, we give them like very specific context and very specific examples. So yeah.
And usually you are trying to debunk claims which are false. So it already happened, like with Bucha, for example. So there was this big case of Russian ministry saying that Bucha was a hoax by Ukrainians, made by Ukrainians, and Bellingcat proved that it wasn't, basically, on variety of facts and reasons. Usually what we encounter in Poland, we got those photos out of the context. And there was a whole different context built around them, like around the photo which was taken 2 years before escalating war, open war. Was something that you encountered a lot? What was the most used disinformation, misinformation, malinformation narrative and tools used in Georgia? What have you seen?
Oh, I think the general disinformation picture is pretty similar to in most of the Eastern European countries because of the influence of Russia and also the scale of this whole thing. But I think I think it depends on the time frame, because in the beginning of the war there used to be direct attacks on Zelensky, saying that he already had fled the country and he had pre-recorded videos, for example, or he was recording his videos
and
from
we know
abroad.
about the video.
Obviously, there were narratives about the biological warfare carried out in Ukrainian laboratories, creating deadly viruses and stuff,
too.
obviously. And that, for example, that the Russian army was like this almighty force that no one could stop, and that the Kyiv would fall within 3 days. So that was something in the beginning of the war. Then the situation kind of moved towards the side of, for example, migrants. Ukrainian migrants were often somehow taken into the target. There were, for example, videos allegedly depicting their misbehavior in other European countries. We were able to trace back those videos back to, I don't know, 2012, 2013, and some of them had nothing to do with Ukraine whatsoever. So I think that was one very interesting part. There were disinformation regarding the sanctions. There was a whole different wave of disinformation that linked Ukraine to the West, saying that the West was the main perpetrator of the conflict. So I think tracing the whole story of disinformation is pretty much tied, obviously, to the development of the conflict itself, because why do we see the emergence of disinformation? Is because it aims to amplify the narratives, it aims to amplify the division among the society, and whatever major happened in the whole process of the war, disinformation always followed, and it basically aimed to go and amplify those differences and messages that were there.
Okay, Oliver, you are doing something slightly different. You are explaining your readers what is happening. Like it's very analytic, right? I wanted to ask you. We spoke yesterday, so apparently there are a lot of people who need that raw analytics. For me, it was surprising. What kind of knowledge do they take from your stories? Are they willing to learn, or they are willing to learn and do it themselves, basically? Because that was one of the things that OSINT was based, that everybody can do it from your couch. Are they willing to educate themselves, or they just want to read?
I think there's a bit of both. I think the OSINT community massively grew, especially because of the Ukraine war, but was steadily growing before already with Syria and so on. But I think there's also people who just consume magazines and like read what I write, for example. And I think people are very interested. Like people are extremely interested in weapon explanations at the moment. We have a great guy in the science department who does like really long read weapons pieces that get read a lot. Sorry. So I was saying that people are very interested in weapons, especially at the moment. So we have someone at Spiegel who explains in great detail like how the Panzerhaubitze or whatever works. And those pieces are actually often most read, and the same goes for military strategy. And people are really interested in what's going on the front lines and so on. And it's kind of surprising because it wasn't the same in previous wars.
How was it in previous wars?
I think it's because Ukraine is closer. It's something we said a lot already, that like it's more of a threat to all of us, and I think that's why people can relate more than Syria, Libya, Somalia, whatever. And I think that's why people are more scared, and that's why they read it.
Can you give me an example of a most popular piece you have written?
I think one, for example, was the Moskva when it sank. So there was a lot of uncertainty in the beginning, and actually some of the first ones to report it were reverse side of the medal. So Telegram channel. Okay, this is awkward. So Telegram channel affiliated with the Wagner group. So you obviously have to be very cautious, but the info was good in the end, and they said that it sank already like hours before pictures came out of it burning and so on. And we wrote up a big piece explaining what the Moskva was, what strategic value it had in the Black Sea. And it was most read on the day. People were extremely interested, and I think it was a good combination between field reporting of our Moscow correspondent, who explained what the reactions were in Moscow, and then also reporting on my end.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of raw analysis are popular in Georgia as well?
I think it is popular still because people like to read this kind of stuff, but I think in our case, we simply don't have time to write such detailed reports such as Oliver does. I'm
so you
pretty
had to
sure.
adjust.
Yeah. So what we try to do is to keep up with the flow of this information. So what we do is basically use specific examples. We debunk a claim and then we try to deliver to the public, so that because if something is published today and then you do an analysis on it and publish 2 days after, then people won't be able to link the two together. And because you have to be very in a timely manner when it comes to this information. I mean, when it comes to, I don't know, explaining something or event or like reporting, that is another whole different story. But I think when we are dealing with social media, when the information flow is very, very intense, I think what you have to do is to be as fast and as swift as possible. So again, OSINT has actually been very useful for us to be as quick as possible, because what you have to do is basically have the resources. I mean, not have the resources, but like to know where to look, and then to find something that you can use as a counter argument.
I'm asking about the raw narrative, the raw facts, and that kind of pieces, because it's slightly different in Poland, I think, and I was really surprised when you said that your pieces are very popular and they're very, I mean, people really want to read them, because for us there is always this dilemma between writing a pure facts, and usually it's very raw narrative, right? There is no human story whatsoever. And this is very hard when you're trying to compete with the pieces which are telling the story, use certain clickbaity headlines and things like that. And we are facing that dilemma here, at least, I think. And OSINT is a different kind of stories. Do you have that dilemma in Georgia and in Germany? Is it a problem to interest people with the raw facts?
Just a small reminder from me. Well, so could it be the last question from you, so we could proceed to the questions from the hall? Because we are pressured by time and coffee break.
Coffee break is like I know.
Okay, then I'll be it will be a very short answer. I mean, we would love to interest our audiences in investigating and seeing pure facts, but what we kind of are trying to achieve here is to not kind of let them open articles that are false, so that so I think in our case, our primary goal would be if someone comes across a post on social media where something is marked as false through our fact-checking program with Facebook, our ideal goal would be to obviously for them to open the article and read everything. And then to look for the facts themselves somewhere in the future. But like, I think at this point, success can also be if they just scroll up and then don't read it, don't read the false article at all. So I think in this stage, that can also be something very useful. But like in the long-term perspective, like obviously emphasizing on media literacy and then like encouraging people to be more creative themselves and to be more critical themselves would also be fantastic. And yeah, we would love to work on that direction as well.
Oliver?
Yeah, and I would maybe add that there's a lot of hunger for these analytical pieces at the moment, but I think it's also good to combine both. So to do a people story combined with an OSINT piece, to speak with some of the field reporters in Ukraine, and then combine it with a good OSINT story. Or there's also some good OSINT stories where you just have videos on the ground that show people so you can do it by yourself. And I think that's actually the best mix, because first of all, you have a different layer of verification from someone on the ground, and then you make the story a bit more relatable to people. And I think both work. I think both sorts of stories get read a lot. So, yeah.
Maybe that's a challenge for journalists to combine both those two. So, questions for the audience, and then
from brave people who are listening to us, not drinking coffee. So. Okay, then I definitely have the questions. Do you if I'm like a new one and I desperately want to learn what is OSINT, whom would you recommend to follow? Like who are the best in this work, and who can I and any other person willing to learn OSINT learn from?
Well, those guys, basically. And for me, Bellingcat and Elliot Higgins, these are, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Bellingcat guys do a great job also. If you want to get a bit more into military analysis, Rob Lee is obviously great. The Oryx guys do a great job. UA Weapons Tracker does a great job. So if you want to get a bit more into the material side of things, then that's definitely people worth following.
Yeah, and absolutely go to Google, and then there are like a very big amount of resources that are already available, so that you can somehow see it and explore yourself. So I think become more creative and like look for different things. I think that's the way to start. I mean, obviously, in addition to all these amazing organizations and think tanks that were mentioned, I think you can also start by digging some stuff yourself on the internet, because the resources are there as well.
Okay, and one more question from me, the last one, I promise. Do you think that using OSINT technologies in last 10 months during the war in Ukraine helped to promote and to advance this technology? So will it even develop faster due to the vast usage of it during the war in Ukraine?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot being done on face recognition and so on, different sorts of trackers and so on. I think you maybe also have to consider the reaction on the other hand. So like militaries are obviously adapting their operational security and so on. So at some point it might also get more difficult because there's less stuff coming out, but we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.